The rain had tailed her all the way from Providence, and by the time Evelyn Haraway stepped off the creaking coach into Coldwater's deserted square, her gloves were soaked and her bonnet drooped with damp. Gray fog clung to the crooked eaves like leeches, swallowing lantern light and rendering the town a smudged fragment at the corner of waking vision. April 10th, 1924. Though already something about time seemed less certain here. The coachman said nothing when she asked about lodgings, merely pointed a trembling finger toward the Coldwater Inn and turned his horse around without collecting his fare. Inside the inn, the air was stale with mildew and pipe smoke. An old woman, all cheekbones and cataract eyes, emerged from behind the counter. "You Haraway?" she rasped. "From Arkham?" Evelyn removed her damp gloves. "Yes, Evelyn Haraway. I was told your town last had contact with the Miskatonic expedition 3 months ago." The woman's lips drew into a grim line. "We get no expeditions here. Not anymore." She handed Evelyn a tarnished key. "Room 3. If you go looking, don't go to the South Marshes. The fog don't behave normal." The room was modest and threadbare, yet Evelyn didn't care. She hardly slept these nights anyway. Dreams of tidal whispers and shifting shadows had replaced rest. That, and the growing compulsion to find out what had happened to Professor Wilcox and his team, a group of antiquarians who had vanished on a brief survey near the Coldwater swamplands. She began asking questions in whispers. The townsfolk answered in thresholds and over shoulders, always with fearful glances toward the southern horizon. "They made camp by an old fishing shack," muttered the gravedigger. "Been empty since old man Griggs lost his face to the mud." "What do you mean, lost his face?" she asked. "Just what I said." He spat on the cobbles and limped away. Her dreams twisted further after that. The marshes unfolded in visions of impossible geometry. Nightmares bled into daylight. At moments, she would glance at the inn clock and find an hour had passed since her last glance, or none at all. On the third morning, the same page was missing from her journal. Only a smudge of ink remained where words might have been. By candlelight, she traced the map recovered from Wilcox's handwritten letter. An old route cutting across razor grass and marsh, ending at a small X. On April 13th, or perhaps 12th, as her pocket watch insisted, Evelyn gathered her satchel, compass, and the academic resolve bred into every Haraway, and began toward the South Marshes with only the gulls shrieking above the fog. As she walked, fog-laden air thickened and sound came in pulses, like waves on a broken phonograph. Birds stopped mid-flight only to resume seconds later. On a bent milestone, someone had carved deep grooves, half runes, half scratches. Beside them seemed scrawled words that shifted as she read. "It has no face. Run the hours backward." She pressed onward. Among skeleton trees and brackish puddles, Coldwater was beginning to reveal its secrets. Something waited there, and it dreamed too. The sun struggled above Coldwater's gnarled tree line as Evelyn Haraway pushed deeper into the swamp, following the directions given by the reluctant innkeeper. Each step squelched through mire that stank of rot and old secrets. She paused where gnarled cypress roots clawed upward like beckoning fingers. Beyond them, half sunken and sagging, stood the shack. It was worse than she'd envisioned. Time and storms had warped the timbers into grotesque angles. Its roof slumped like a weary carcass. The air vibrated with oppressive stillness. A crow croaked once from beneath the eaves and fell silent. Inside mold clung to every surface. The floorboards groaned under Evelyn's boots as she stepped cautiously through the doorless threshold. A broken cot, tattered academic satchel, and cracked lantern lay scattered across the floor. Her fingers brushed a moss-choked journal pinned beneath fallen debris. Rubbing the grime free, she recognized the embossed seal of Miskatonic University, the same crest worn by the vanished Dr. Halverson and his team. Flipping open the brittle journal pages, she found frantic entries. Weathered ink raved of dream tides and hollow veils behind the stars. Maps without geography. Symbols of unknown origin. Fragmented scrawl. The dagger is not ours. It remembers. She found it beneath the floor, through a gap in the warped wood that drew her attention not by sight, but by some pulsing awareness. Moving aside warped slats, her hand closed around an object colder than ice. Drawing it up into the murky light, Evelyn stared. The silver dagger shimmered with a subtle, internal pulse. Its blade was veined with ever-shifting glyphs, never quite holding form, like symbols glimpsed in dreams and forgotten upon waking. The hilt bore tarnished filigree shaped like reaching, eyeless faces. As she turned the blade, the light around her changed, flickering, dimming, brightening again. The smell of the swamp grew distant before crashing back in full force. A shiver coursed through her. Shadows in the corners of the shack stretched and contracted in unnatural rhythm. The journal pages behind her fluttered violently, though no wind blew. Night fell between blinks. One moment the light through the shattered windows was fading dusk. Then, without transition, full dark. Evelyn stumbled to her feet, heart pounding. "How long?" she murmured, her voice swallowed by the thick silence. Outside, the moon had risen high, far too soon. Stars wheeled overhead in unfamiliar constellations. She felt herself sliding, time unraveling just enough to be felt, like the click of a gear skipping a tooth. The dagger vibrated faintly in her grip. It was more than artifact. It was fulcrum. From across the water, a shape moved, tall, pale, and faceless, flickering between gestures of presence and absence. Evelyn backed into the shack, her breath quickening. She gripped the dagger tighter, heart racing with fear and determination. The expedition left something behind. And now, Evelyn Haraway was part of whatever it had awakened. Somewhere beneath the mire, answers waited, and possibly something far worse. Rain drizzled through the willows as Evelyn stepped beyond the shattered threshold of the swamp shack once more, the silver dagger wrapped carefully in linen and tucked under her arm. The glyphs on its hilt shimmered, no longer merely shifting, but pulsing faintly with an inner light. The previous night's sudden jump through time still weighed on her thoughts. Hours had vanished. Trees stood where none had before. She could hardly trust her own breath. Something deeper called to her now. Among the torn expedition notes she'd found in the shack, a crude sketched map had revealed a symbol matching one etched into the dagger's guard. A spiral eye, marked beneath a bend of the Coldwater swamp, where no light seemed to reach. In her dreams, it had oozed like a tumor from the depths, a place beneath. She found it just before dusk, a half-swallowed sinkhole skirted by twisted reeds. The silver glyph on the dagger flared briefly as she approached, the air around her flexing like heated glass. Evelyn knelt, brushed aside damp moss, and revealed a metal hatch. It creaked open. The subterranean chamber below wasn't natural. Brickwork sagged inward where black roots had grown through walls. The air was warm with mildew and humming whispers. She descended, lantern in hand, and found on the walls symbols matching those on the dagger and the dreams, lines that twitched when watched too long. Further in, she uncovered sodden journals bound in disintegrating leather, expedition logs. The last entry, dated March 2nd, 1924, read, "We unearthed it. The face that is not a face. It saw us all, and in seeing, it remembered." Clawed gouges marred the stone floor near a hollow recess smeared dark. There was no sign of the expedition members beyond those tattered satchels and skeletal remains shoved behind crates. But Evelyn felt them, heat trailing fingers along her spine and burrowing into memory not hers. The wall of time fractured again. In a breath, Evelyn stood in the chamber as it once was. 3 men shouting, one clutching the dagger, another screaming as something oozed from the hollow like fluid smoke. All of them blurred at the face. One turned toward her, mouth wide in a scream that came seconds late. And then, darkness. Silence. She gasped as reality snapped back. The lantern had gone cold, yet she no longer needed it. The glyphs on the dagger burned bright, casting shapes of eyes upon every narrow wall. The visions had left her reeling, but also clarified one thing. The faceless thing was never meant to be unearthed. It nested in time itself, and it remembered her now. A final journal page lay at her feet, weighted by a melted compass. Ink scrawled in frantic lines. Only silver remembers the old bindings. Only the dreamer sees their path. But to look upon the faceless is to be seen across all time. Evelyn gripped the dagger tighter. The doorway beyond yawned open, not built by any human hand. Carved of obsidian and deeper shadow, it breathed with distant, ageless breath. She stepped forward. Time rippled, and below, something waited. The air below the mire pulsed like a dying heartbeat. Evelyn stumbled into the heart of the chamber, the muck-streaked dagger clutched tightly in her gloved hand. All around her, reality buckled. Walls shimmered like heat haze, and the damp stone floor seemed to rise and fall with unnatural rhythm. At the chamber's core stood the thing the journals had described only in fragmented dread, faceless, massive, and obscenely hybrid. A pulpy shimmer of flesh pulsed where a face should be, as if the creature defied the mere concept of identity. The abomination shifted when it sensed her, not with sound or movement, but in a way Evelyn could only understand as a rearrangement of being. Her thoughts cracked. Time folded. One moment she was a child by her father's library hearth. The next, she returned to this subterranean nightmare, breathless and ancient with exhaustion. The glyphs on the silver dagger flared in her hand with silent light, each symbol moving like a living worm. She remembered now these glyphs were not merely runes of warding or understanding. They were instructions, an ancient syntax beyond speech. The abomination surged forward, tendrils of flesh twisting through time. She held the dagger before her, the shifting markings aligning in patterns her dreams had taught her to read. "It's not awake," she whispered to herself. "It's becoming." The creature struck, its formless limbs passing through centuries as they reached for her. She recited the glyph phrases under her breath, syllables from dimensions she had only seen in fevered dreams. With a final, lung-torn shout, Evelyn drove the dagger forward, not into flesh, but into the air, the moment, into the wound in time the creature had opened. There was no sound, only stillness. Time flattened. Then came rupture, A scream fractured across realities. The chamber exploded with silence so profound it tore at her senses. The abomination writhed, not in pain, but in resistance, as if trying to remain within this now collapsing moment. Bands of silver light encased it, tethered to the dagger still buried in flickering possibility. Evelyn basked in a pinprick of clarity. In that final instant, she saw the faces of the lost expedition set within the creature's form. Their consciousnesses dissolved, fed to it, or merged. She stumbled back as the horror imploded inward, swallowed by converging timelines. The chamber trembled and faded. Light dwindled to necrotic dusk. Coldwater above groaned with tectonic fatigue, ancient roots and rotted pylons crumbling beneath foot. Evelyn emerged from the mire at dawn, or what seemed like dawn, into a Coldwater subtly shifted. Buildings slightly wrong, windows mismatched. Time had not healed, only rearranged around a broken axis. The dagger was gone. The dreams, not. She returned to the Haraway estate weeks or years later. None could say. She never spoke of the expedition again. But some nights, when mists move against the wind and clocks tick in reverse, her silhouette can be seen at her study window, sketching glyphs from memory onto worn parchment. The veil had been pierced. The faceless had awakened and fallen. But the wound in time would always bleed.